welcome. It's very nice to see you all. Thanks for attending today's event, Towards Peace and Justice, Bringing Healing to Utah Through Reckoning with Its History of Racial Terrorism. My name is Allison Maurer. I'm a librarian at Marriott Library, and I volunteer with the Semahadithi African American Heritage and Culture Foundation, who has co-sponsored today's event. I want to welcome our moderator, Alice Faulkner Birch, Director of Special Events for Semahadithi and member of the Utah State History Records Advisory Board. I also want to welcome our esteemed panelists, whom Alice will formally introduce shortly. Today's event will discuss historical racial violence, so please practice self-care as you listen to these details and participate today. If you would prefer to see only the exhibit, you can do so on level 2 of the library. For those viewing via our live stream, welcome. You can also view the online exhibit. While discussing violence, such as these horrific murders that we're going to discuss today, can be difficult, it is important to acknowledge these facts of our history so that everyone has a chance to be informed, to come together and heal in order to move forward. I've spoken with students about the exhibit on level 2, and they see the injustice and the pain, but they have also recognized the incredible power that comes with learning a fuller, more complete history as a way of reckoning, reconciling, and moving towards a more just future. The exhibit serves as a memorial, and as you'll learn from the panelists today, it is part of a national memorial and museum dedicated to peace and justice for victims of racial lynching in this country. I have pulled several books over there against the wall from the collection that are relevant to the topic, so please come and check them out after the event if you want to learn more. There are books about the history of lynching, but also titles about resilience, civil rights, reclaiming spaces for those impacted by the harmful system of white supremacy and systemic racism. Books about educational justice, the strength of families, the need for more equitable and empathetic social support systems, and more. Even including Edna Lewis's cookbook. I mean, I couldn't help myself. She's just like an icon, you know? And also for those watching online, if you want to, I know you probably can't see the books here, but if you check out the references that are available on the online exhibit, then many of the same books are what are on display today here in the Gould. And you can also check out the library's blog for the post from January called Choosing Love Over Hate. The book list from that display also has similar titles for what's up right now. So please now help me in welcoming Alice Faulkner Birch and today's panelists.
Thank you, Allison. We express gratitude to the Marriott Library and to our contact and liaison, Allison Maurer, for partnering with us to do this crucial community conversation. Thank you for joining us here today. On Saturday, 11 June 2023, Saturday, 11 June 2022, Semahadithi African American Heritage and Culture Foundation held a soil collection ceremony in collaboration with the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. Today, our panelists will discuss that event and what led to it being necessitated through their various lenses. Our panelists today are Robert Birch, to my left, the Executive Director of Semahadithi African American Heritage and Culture Foundation and the foundation's founder. And to his left, J.R. Hardman. She is an associate producer with PBS Utah. And next is Jamie McGriff. She is a journalist for KUTV2 News. Thank you each for joining us this morning. Really appreciate that. We have much to discuss today, so we're going to get started. And to start, our fourth panelist, who is scheduled to be with us, is James Tabry. He's the professor of philosophy here at the U and a Semahadithi Foundation volunteer. Due to illness, James is unable to join us today. So James, if you're watching, take care, please, and get well. We need you. There is much work to do. Yes, I know you know that. Thank you. So to start, in James's absence, he sent some information that Allison will be sharing with us.
Hello again. Thank you, Alice. And hi, Jim. Hope you're doing well. So this is what Dr. Tabery sent in. It's the information that's both in the online exhibit and the exhibit upstairs on level 2. The physical exhibit, the online exhibit, and the panel discussion today all revolve around the lives of 2 Black men who were violently murdered in Salt Lake City in the 19th century. Thomas Coleman arrived in Utah in the 1840s as a slave, traveling from Mississippi with slave owners who had converted to the LDS faith, and records indicate he may have been a member of the church himself. After emancipation, he worked at the Salt Lake House Hotel in downtown Salt Lake City. The exact circumstances surrounding his death are murky. On the afternoon of December 11th, 1866, boys found his body propped against the Arsenal building, which no longer exists, but was located near the present-day location of the Utah State Capitol building. He had been violently beaten, stabbed multiple times, and his throat was cut. His murderers left a sign on his corpse reading, "Notice to all, racial epithet, take warning, leave white women alone." An impromptu coroner's jury quickly dismissed the case as unresolved, and his body was buried in the paupers section of the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Less than 20 years later, William Harvey arrived in Salt Lake City in the summer of 1883. He was an Army veteran traveling from Colorado, and he set up a shoe shine stand on Main Street downtown in order to make money. Less than a month after his arrival, Harvey became involved in an argument with another business owner on Main Street who called the police. When the authorities arrived, a fight ensued, shots were fired, and Harvey was accused of killing the police chief. Harvey was taken into custody at the city jail located downtown at First South and State Street, where an angry mob of over 1,000 gathered around the prison. Police officers, after brutally beating Harvey, turned him over to the mob, who proceeded to slowly hang him from the rafters of a nearby stable. They then dragged his corpse down State Street for several blocks, only ending the gruesome scene when the mayor of Salt Lake City arrived and forcibly took control of Harvey's body.
Thank you, Allison. Robert, tell us about the Equal Justice Initiative and their Community Remembrance Project. Why does EJI think it's important for communities to take ownership of this history?
Okay, the Equal Justice Initiative, if you guys don't know, is located in Montgomery, Alabama. They have an exhibit that they've created to memorialize the lynchings of African Americans in the United States. And I guess you can imagine most of those would have been down south. But unfortunately, there was quite a number away from the South, including Utah. The Equal Justice Initiative, objective in all of this is to create community conversation. For some time, they allowed states and communities to collect soils at lynchings location and put them in receptacles to be displayed at the lynching museum in Montgomery. But over the last several years, they've been very specific in the process of how this should be done. I've been contacting EJI for probably the last 8 years, trying to figure out how to get this done, because I was doing it the old-fashioned way that everyone was doing it, just contact EJI, say we want to collect soils at lynching locations, and we just send you the soil. But they time and time again sent me an email back that said, no, there's this lady named LaShawn Williams, there's this man named James Tabrey, and there's this other person who contacted us, and you just need to contact all of these people first before we let you do anything. And apparently they were doing the same thing. And so after some time, I just finally decided, okay, let's go ahead and just contact all of these people. The only one that I actually knew was LaShawn. And so I contacted everybody and had a conversation that, look, EJI is not going to let us do this unless we talk to each other. So once we got together as a group and we sent another email out to EJI, they then sent us the instructions on how they wanted to do it. They had a very clear and clean process about it. So they sent us the instructions on how to submit to them to do a soil collection event, a monument event, a market event, and so on. Long story short, the thing is that they intended for this to be a community conversation. Not just people just collecting soil and sending it to them, but gathering the community to make sure that all of us had conversations about equal justice, who gets to take part in the justice system and who don't, how that our ideas of race and prejudice prevent some folks from having the necessary services and care that they should receive. So it's not just about lynching, it's about people who can't get health care because of their race, people who get mistreated by their doctors because of their race, people who can't find jobs or find homes because of their race. And so what we ultimately ended up doing is we contacted 30 different organizations in Utah to take part in this. Some of those places were Calvary Missionary Baptist Church, was one of the first places, Baseline Missionary Fellowship. We contacted, of course, the University of Utah, several folks here at the University of Utah, as a matter of fact, Westminster College, Utah Black Roundtable, NAACP Ogden, NAACP Salt Lake City, and the list just goes on. Like I said, we had 30 different organizations to sign off. And once we made the submission with the 30 organizations that were buying into it, then they allowed us to start the event process, meaning setting up the locations where the lynchings took part to be able to collect the soil. And so the idea is that the community comes out and at that location of the lynching, collect the soil from that location. And so we did that up at the Capitol building, which was once Arsenal Hill, where Mr. Coleman was left, and at the federal building on 100 South, where the Salt Lake City jail used to be. And it was a very somber event where we had the community come out and they took part in filling those jars that were sent to EJI out in Montgomery, as well as the jar that you can view upstairs in the exhibit here. So it is a way for us to try to remember and memorialize the things that happen to individual citizens that are extrajudicial, meaning outside of the law, and what kind of things are we thinking and doing that allowed that type of thing to happen.
Thank you, Robert. Located on the screen behind us is a small collage of photographs. Most of them were taken the day of the soil collection ceremony. And then going towards the end, to the far right, we have one photo from the Equal Justice, the EJI Memorial and Museum, which is located in Alabama. JR, you visited that museum in Alabama. What did you learn from that visit, and what was your experience there?
So you can't see it super well in this version of the image, but like Robert was saying, most of the memorial is set up. There's these large, almost like iron coffins that hang from the ceiling of the installation. The vast majority of them are names of people that were lynched in the US South. And the main focus of the museum is African Americans who were lynched in the South. The one part of the memorial that you see in this image, I took that photo because it had my birth state, which was Minnesota, on it. And then on Friday, when we were talking about what we would speak about today, I also looked back at the photo and realized it had Utah on it as well. The names of the victims are not on this particular part of the memorial because the names are organized by Southern state and then underneath the specific county where those murders occurred. And so this particular element of the installation has just the list of states where they knew that other lynchings had occurred. There were other people lynched that were not African American as well. They're not really represented in this installation. The main focus is the African Americans who were killed in the South. But then if you go inside the museum, that's where the soil jars are being housed. And when I had gone, it was before I ever had made plans to live in Utah. And so when I was looking at this memorial, I was looking at the county where I was living in Georgia at the time, my home state in Minnesota, other places where I had lived or come across. And the thing that I noticed and consistently made an impact for me was it was everywhere. It was everywhere where I have lived in the US. It is everywhere that I have visited. This is happening still to people. A recent event is the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. That was an extrajudicial killing of a man that people thought might have done something wrong. And what I was thinking about as I was experiencing this was just, this is not just part of our history, it's part of our present. And we need to remember this because the idea of memorials like this is to not repeat our horrific past, but we keep doing it. And I think it's really important to see that it's all of us, and all of us could have been participants in an activity like this. All of us could have been the murderer, and in some sense, all of us could have been the victim. And I know that the likelihood, if I had lived 100 years ago, would have been that this might have been something done in my name. Allison read, this is something that was done to protect white women. And as a white woman, I need to realize that this is something that would have been done in the guise of protecting me from a threat that is really just people going out in public trying to live their lives. People having relationships with the people that they love. People trying to be regular, everyday citizens. And so thinking about, what would my role have been at the time that something like this happened with somebody like Mr. Coleman? I would hope that that this would not have been done in my name, but it is very likely that that is something that could have happened. And this is still being done today. How do I not actively participate in it, and how do I actively try to prevent it from continuing? So, yeah.
Thank you, JR. We're going to turn to the photograph behind us for just a moment. The top left is one of our signs that we had up during the soil collection ceremony. Bottom left, I think everybody can see him. That's Pastor Richards, who participated in the soil collection ceremony. Of course, in the middle, the biggest picture, are the jars of the soil that was collected where Mr. Coleman and Mr. Harvey were each lynched. Bottom crowd is the crowd gathered at the state capitol building, and then the state capitol up there. These spoons, these wooden spoons that you see, were remembrances that we had made for all the attendees to take one away from each soil collection ceremony. Mr. Coleman's was held at the state capitol. Down the street, we went from the state capitol and then walked together down to the federal building. And there at the federal building, we held the soil collection ceremony for Mr. Harvey. And so there's spoons in each of these men's names that people who attended could take away. You see somebody putting soil into one of the jars down here at the bottom, just using a hand. You see at the top right, JR using a spoon to put the soil into the jar, and then she kept that spoon since that was the one she used. You see Robert speaking at the steps of the Capitol building. Each of us sitting up here today attended these soil collection ceremony that was held on Saturday, 11 June of 22. Jamie, in February of 22, you developed and produced a weekly TV series on KUTV2 News titled Belonging in Utah. Tell us a little about that series and how you incorporated last year's soil collection ceremony into your series.
Hi, everyone. The journey for me getting to that point of talking about lynchings that took place in Utah, it actually started 2 weeks before Black History Month. I had just moved to the Salt Lake Valley, and for obvious reasons, I needed to figure out a way to tell stories during Black History Month and that I felt that would be compelling. And still being somewhat new, I was unsure about which direction to turn. And so reaching out to Representative Hollins, she referred me to this organization I had not heard of before, and I was still trying to acclimate myself to who's who in the area. And I was told to get in touch with Robert Birch, and I got contact information, and I called and said, hi, you don't know me, maybe you do, but I don't know you. And I would like to do something for Black History Month. Now keep in mind that I did not know, it was murky water. And if you've ever walked through murky water, you kind of walk really slowly because you don't know what you're going to step on or if something's going to bite you. And so in this case, I really didn't know what I was stepping into. But boy, what a treat and what a journey it's been. That one conversation with Robert, my mind exploded with all of the information that he had. And so in in talking with him, he was a little leery of me. I was excited about him. He wasn't sure what exactly I was thinking about doing, but in my mind, I just had all of these ideas that just exploded based off of the information, a wealth of knowledge of things that I didn't know about. And for someone such as myself coming in from the South, Mobile, Alabama, Cajun country, I was raised in the South, but I had been to different parts of the country for TV news. I didn't honestly know what kind of Black history could be found in Utah. It's the truth. And so I had to get past my own bias, and Robert helped me to see that, yes, there are stories out here, and they're beautiful stories, tragic stories, but beautiful stories that had not been told on a scale that I was looking to do. And so, thankfully, and I'm very, very appreciative of the support of management, I told them, I said, hey, look, this is what I'm thinking about doing. We can do this for Black History Month, and, you know, be honest with you, Sema Hadithi, they have all of these other stories that really have not been told, that we could stretch this out until March. And when I sat down with Robert for the very first story, and also introducing the series, Belonging in Utah, he touched on something that I felt was very important. He said the reason why he's pushing to help families learn about their Black ancestry in Utah, but also pushing the stories of Black history in general, is because a lot of young Black professionals, they come to Salt Lake or they come to Utah, they stay, get what they need to get as far as their experience concerned, and then they're out because they don't have stories that they can relate to that makes them feel like they belong. Now, mind you, when Robert told me this, I did not have a title for the series yet. And so I was still trying to figure out, and you know, this is 2 weeks before Black History Month, and I already knew that the first story that would air would not make that first week because I'm still trying to slam this together and figure out the elements and how to make this thing extraordinary and over the top. And so it was only when I was having a conversation with my parents and I got off the phone with them that I realized what the title of the series should be called, because I could feel, and I think everybody in some form or fashion has that sense of wanting to belong somewhere, to somebody, to an initiative, something. And that's where belonging came to be, belonging in Utah. It resonated so well with management. And from there, we just took off running. And the first story ran. And I believe that when Robert saw the first story, he realized at that point that, wow, okay, we finally have a platform where we can tell these stories that we didn't have before. And the series in general, it is my understanding, after hearing from others, that this is something that hasn't really been done before. Not on this scale, not on this consistency, not lasting for over a year. And that was significant. There were stories that a lot of people that through Robert and Alice and others who they connected me with who were affiliated with Sema Hadithi, they shared, and they were so willing to share that people were coming up to me, even folks that I worked with, who said, I've lived here for so many years, or I've lived here all of my life, and I've never heard of these stories. These stories were never taught in our schools. We did not know that this happened. And that was very touching. And then to hear from managers who were saying, you know what, we like this. Let's just keep it going. Let's just see how it goes. You know, this is just great information. And at that point, you know, you open up the floodgates as far as I'm concerned. So I call Robert and Alice and I bug them about every 2 weeks or every week or so. We're rescheduling. And then in a phone conversation with Alice and Robert, because we would have these about weekly. Easily, we would be on the phone for about an hour or so. That's when they brought up the subject matter of lynching sites in Utah. And I said, wait, what? Oh, shoot, this got real. Okay, so at that point, we met months before the story aired. We met in like early March. It was still very cold outside. It was actually, ironically, around this time roughly a year ago. We were shooting at one of the sites where the lynching took place, and that was for William H. Harvey. And he was lynched in what was the site, well, it is currently the site of the federal building that's right off of State Street. And that's where I met Dr. Jim Tabery. Hey, Jim, I hope that you're going to be getting better soon. Sorry that you can't be here. Jim was very instrumental in sharing information, but what I also really appreciated about Jim, he was racially sensitive to the subject matter. And what I mean by that, he said, I don't feel comfortable being the only person that you talk to about this subject. Yes, I speak on the subject with my class, but on this level, on a broadcast level, and with the work that's being done, I need Robert to be here with me to also give his points of view about this. When I tell you my respect level for him shot way up, it was already high, but it just went up further. I mean, he was in a stratosphere at this point. I said, this guy's all right with me. But he was right. And so he and Robert, they both were present to talk about this site. And it was mind-blowing to me because no one had talked about this before. And to go along State Street to see these beautiful flashy buildings, some are flashy, but you know, to see these buildings, and then to know that somebody was lynched on that very site was very, very sobering. And for me personally, I have visited what is called the Lynching Museum in Montgomery with my family. We had a family reunion, and one of the sites where we visited was in that particular museum that you had the privilege of also seeing. And of course, all that you said, yes, it resonated deeply because I remember my feelings walking through that museum as well. It's not uncommon, of course, to hear about lynchings in certain places in the United States. But the impression that a lot of people have is that those things wouldn't happen in Salt Lake City or they wouldn't happen in Utah. But for Robert to describe the mentality of some of the pioneers who moved to Utah, that changed everything because you have converts who were coming from Mississippi, and they had the slavery mentality of owning slaves and mistreatment and whatnot, and they brought that over, but, you know, they felt that they were what's the word, that they would not be held accountable for what they felt societal norms were, and instead of what the moral and spiritual role as far as what right and wrong would be. So when I presented this to my immediate manager, I told my manager, I said, listen, I have something here that I think that we need to touch on, but we need to save this for May. That's when we really throw out the big stories, because it was a major story. And with Belonging in Utah, the series in general was to talk about stories that had not been told or rarely told. And they had an arsenal of stories, and they were so excited after they saw the first story and the next story after that. We talked about some of the historic neighborhoods. We talked about Plum Alley. I was able to meet some of the folks who were involved in what I consider to be the nucleus of Sema Hadithi and some of the researchers who were I truly believe all of you all are brilliant in how you're able to find information. I just needed to know how to piece it together and just make it shine for people to care about and watch. And so all of these stories about Black history and the like, everybody received it. I was surprised when I first announced the series. It blew up on Twitter. You know, it blew up on social media. I mean, I knew I would get some traction, but I was not expecting it to the point that people would immediately call me, I think a day or two later, congratulating me on it before the series even started and said, hey, we're looking to partner with you and blah, 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 blah. Well, I couldn't do all of that because they, you know, one organization wanted to have it as, you know, my series is called Belonging in Utah, but they had Belong in Utah. And at that point, I said, no. I haven't even made it through starting my own series yet, and you're already creating partnership, which is great, but I have to stick with the vision of what I have. And I knew that if folks are jumping on board now, then that means that there's something good here. And yes, there was something good there. So when talking about the lynching sites, I gave management a heads up. They immediately went, wow, really? Yeah, let's go for it. And I told them, I said, listen, I'm going to need more airtime to talk about this because this is a heavy subject already, but it's a subject that really has not been told in the state of Utah on this scale. You know, KUTV 2 News is about to put this thing on blast. And I'm spearheading this, you know. So, you know, they gave me more airtime, and I told them, I said, I need to do this in parts on top of that. I need 3 weeks. I needed the first week to talk about the fact that this actually happened in Utah. People think that this is the place where the saints live. Nobody would do any harm to black people or anyone for that matter. No, that's not the case. We introduced the fact that it happened. Then we talked more in detail about the fact that the black man who was lynched, he was also a veteran. He was an Army veteran. There was what was called, in other words, a lynching parade that took place down State Street. These are shocking things that folks would not know about, but the history records have it there. And after talking about that, then the third part to this 3-part series, or mini-series within the series, talked about today's modern forms of lynchings when it comes to the black community. Not being able to have affordable housing, not being able to have decent jobs. So it goes beyond just poor treatment. Then you have, you know, school districts that are limiting access to education for our children. So these topics were very heavy, and I just knew that with belonging in Utah, talking about black history, of course it had to be a part of the Belonging in Utah series, of course. I was interested in it because, once again, the bias that I had were being stripped away with each and every story that I was putting together. And that was crucial. And when I announced that we were going to be taking a step in a different direction, because all of the other stories that we did, oh yeah, that's cool, talking about a neighborhood, that's cool, the women who have made a difference, and that's great too. And one of the first, I think one of the first black women, actually the first black woman to create the school program when it comes to feeding kids, that was a black woman. You know, speaking with relatives, a park named after a black woman, and then talking about the fact that out of the first 4 men that ever stepped foot in the Salt Lake Valley before the pioneers came, 3 of them were black. I didn't know that. And so that changed the whole scope, which all of these are fascinating, but then when you're talking about the heavy-hitting stories like lynching, which you only think, oh no, it happened in the South or elsewhere, that would never happen here. We're too good for that. No, they happened here. And those are just the 2 that were found. And I had enough information collected to cover extensively 1. And that was William H. Harvey. Imagine how many more stories like that potentially may exist that just haven't been found yet, unfortunately. So it was imperative that I owed it to not only myself, but I owed it to the community at large and for the whole country to do my best in telling this story as tastefully as possible as well. The story itself is hard. People don't like to talk about difficult issues, and normally when you see me on the air, it's Jamie, hey, you know, but there is a way to tell the story, even the difficult stories, but in my mind, and my hope is that it would lead to a place of understanding, to give self-reflection. I have covered other interesting and difficult topics as well. The lynching part of it was just one, and that was a major turning point with my professional career as well. because I had never touched on it the way that I've had the opportunity to do that here, and with the support of management, with the support of Seema Hadithi, and with the resources they provided. So I've also covered the topic of what is it like when you are a white person and you are a Latter-day Saint and you do your research, because that's big in that community as a whole, in this community. What do you do when you discover that you actually are a descendant of a black slave, and who was then freed? What do you do? How do you reconcile your family's history with the present? And to be able to talk with somebody after learning about, you hear about lynchings, but then to see that it's, you have folks who are in your direct bloodline. That was another big one. And then have someone step forward and talk about it is big. It was a big deal for Robert, Jim Tabery, and others to talk about it. And so I think it was an honor and a privilege, but it was necessary to incorporate that and to include it with the Belonging in Utah series. And I had to see it through. We made sure that KUTV2 News was present for the soil collection ceremony, because I told managers, I said, listen, we have to be present. We have to see this thing to completion. And so it is now an online resource now. Anyone who would like to get access and see the link, feel free to reach out to me. Let me know. I will be more than happy to send it to you. I believe that Seema Hadithi also has the link on its website as well. But it is now a critical resource that people can glean from, and to be able to look at these sites a little bit differently in Salt Lake, because Salt Lake and Utah as a whole is no different than the rest of the United States as far as some of the ugly things that can happen to innocent people.
A lot to say about that. Huh?
It was a lot. I mean, it's a lot, because there's a story. Thank you. Thank you. And I don't mean to be long-winded about it. It's just that, if you bring me here,
Right?
I put my heart and soul into this particular project. And for it to come out the way that it did, I'm very proud. And I do hope that people will be able to reflect and go back to that as a resource to use, so others can learn as well, that the history that was previously taught, you may have to revisit that.
Yeah.
So my next question is for Robert, but before I go to that question, I just want to share a fact. I found a statistic that states that approximately 4,500 lynchings were done. Of those 4,500, approximately 3,500 of those were of Black American people, men, women, and children. Robert, memorializing the victims of these lynchings is just one of many historical projects that Seema Hadithi Foundation has done. Please share what Seema Hadithi Foundation is and why the work you're doing that examines the past is important for people living in Utah today.
Okay. And before I answer that question, I just want to hit on a couple of things that Jamie said in that, I'm sorry, my brain just went. JR just said, putting two J's next to me and I can't get them to come apart. Okay, one thing, there isn't a lynching exhibit other than ours that's at the University of Utah campus. If you go up to UMFA, Utah Museum of Fine Arts, the Smithsonian sent out a brand new exhibit to you guys here just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And a part of that exhibit is called Erased Lynching. And in Erased Lynching, it talks about lynchings west of the Mississippi, which includes Utah, because so many people are fixated on the idea that lynchings happen only in the South, but they have happened in the North as well as out West. In Erased Lynching, Ken Gonzalez Day takes the lynching postcards that people actually used to send. They would lynch a man, take a picture, put it in the U.S. mail, and send it to somebody. Okay? It's called Erased Lynching. And go look at that exhibit, because in the exhibit, he actually erases the victims as well as the rope. So the only thing you get to look at are the perpetrators. I think it's a very profound exhibit because it makes you think. Because if we see pictures of someone lynched, of course we're going to go to the most shocking part, that is the victim. But if we erase that, now we're asking you to look at these people who do this. Okay? So check that out over at UMFA. And if you want to learn more about lynching postcards, you can find that online. I believe it's on Paramount. It's called Lynching Postcards.
And UMFA, say it again.
Utah Museum of Fine Arts.
Okay.
UMFA. So go check that out if you're interested in learning more about it. And JR also spoke to people exercising the power of protecting women. I've had family members, if you've ever heard of the Scottsboro Boys from Tennessee, that I had a great uncle who was also arrested and spent almost 20 years in jail for the idea that these little black boys raped this white woman. But also, you have to understand too, it's just a sheer exercise of superiority in a lot of cases. Because here in Utah, there were more Chinese men lynched than there was black men lynched. So there were more Native American lynched than Chinese lynched. So for a lot of this, it's just a sheer exercise in superiority, okay? This summer, we hope to install the monuments for EGI, for Coleman and Harvey. So hopefully we'll get one somewhere around the state capitol. We actually submitted this year to have it put on the state capitol's grounds, and the committee at the state capitol, out of the 4 exhibits that they was considering for the state capitol, they would only select 2. And there were 2 organizations, mine and the NAACP, who submitted exhibit installations for 2 black people. Out of that 4, 2 black people were turned down. So the only 2 that was accepted out of the 4 was one for the Asian community, which is great, but the one that we really were upset about had nothing to do with Utah history. So they accepted a submission from New York City to have an exhibit put on the state grounds for Utah history, and instead of accepting any one of the 2 exhibits for Samuel Chambers or for Thomas Coleman. So we know that there's some challenges, even getting our state legislature to even look at the consideration that we might need to think about these things. And to help have the conversation is that when I was at the state capitol and they asked me about Mr. Coleman, the thing they asked me was, what did he do to get lynched? And my response was that he was in love with a white woman. That's what got him lynched. He didn't break any laws. He just decided he wanted to have a relationship with someone he loved who happened to be white. And the state legislature still turned that down. And in the sense of Samuel Chambers, this was a prominent African American who ran one of the most successful fruit farms in the state of Utah down in Mill Creek. He'd gone to the state fairgrounds each year and won Blue Ribbon prizes for his fruit. But they saw it not significant to even recognize that success. So we see that just trying to memorialize and remember the contributions of African Americans in Utah are going to be very difficult, even when it is something positive like a successful black businessman. Simi Hadithi took on the idea of preservation with one of our executive board member, Kirk Huffaker. He actually leads the preservation working group. And I was really pleased when Kirk decided to answer yes or positively to working with me Nseme Aditi, because he has a long history, almost 30 years of preservation in Utah. As a matter of fact, he ran Preservation Utah for us, for the state. He used to be the executive director of Preservation Utah. And Kirk has brought a wealth of experience and knowledge in helping us understand how we should go about finding places to preserve and preserving historical sites in Utah.
Robert, I'm going to cut you short there. If you have additional questions about the Sima Aditi Foundation, I invite you to stay when this panel concludes and ask Robert those questions. I want to ask one more real quick question, and Jara, I'm putting you on the spot because I'm saying real quick. So you documented the soil collection ceremony last summer, and those photographs have been included up here in this collage. They're included in the Marriott Library's online exhibit of lynching, as well as they're part of the lynching exhibit that's on the second floor. What were you hoping to capture at the soil collection ceremony with your photographs?
When I originally went, I was hoping to capture that I had been there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for PBS, but I went as a civilian, I guess. I think there is a lot of power in something physical, something tangible, something visual that you can see that represents that something happened. And you know how they say, like, it didn't happen if there's no picture?
Right.
This was really, initially it was for me to remember. And then I thought, and y'all asked, can we use these pictures? And I didn't even know they were going to, I had no idea they were going to be included in an exhibit or that there were going to be people that were going to see them, but I thought it was important to document that experience because, like y'all have been saying, these stories, they're not taught in schools. They're not remembered. And I like to think a lot of times that there's something else that had a bigger impact, or we just don't have enough time in the curriculum to cover that. But they're also being actively repressed. It's not just we don't have the money for that, or we don't have the time for that, or we don't. It's also that somebody doesn't want you to see that. And I think, like, I have my notebook from my 8th grade history class, and I look in there and I can see, like, exactly what was taught to me and try to remember, what I never heard about this. I was in Hawaii on vacation a couple weeks ago, and I went to some museums there about the history of the U.S. involvement with Hawaii. And when I was at the memorial for the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, there's this giant photograph of the Hawaiians at the March on Washington. Like, people have been involved, they know these stories, and it's only when you're trying to think of what do we want to memorialize, and people are like, I want to memorialize the thing that makes me feel good and happy, because it's uncomfortable to memorialize this. But it's not just people, who are the descendants of enslaved people, it's the people that are descendants of the people that enslaved them. And sometimes it's the same person that has ancestors who were enslaved and ancestors who did the enslaving. And this is my history. Thomas Coleman and William Harvey, they're my history. They're our history. And the people that did this to them are my history, and they're my history. And I need to have that image so that I don't forget. And because until you know, you don't know, and you can't act accordingly. Part of what I think we in the news and with museums is we tell people the information that they need to make informed decisions.
Right.
And if you don't have the information, you're making a decision based on ignorance. And I don't know until somebody tells me this was my experience, and then I can make a decision of policy or what I'm going to do or where we're going to send our money, what we're going to teach in our schools. And to me, the pixels in the photograph, that's a preservation of this information, and then it's experiences like this that tells us, now that we know, what do we do? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's so important what you're doing with telling people, they belong, because there are people trying to actively tell them that they don't.
Yeah, that's true.
And they're trying to say this history, it's not appropriate for children. Kids got lynched.
Children.
Kids are experiencing this. If they're old enough to have it happen to them, they're old enough to learn about it.
Exactly. Thank you, JR. I really appreciate you sharing that. We're going to open up for a couple of minutes if there are any, we're going to open up for a couple of minutes if there are any questions. Angela, are there any questions by attendees that are on the live stream? Okay, thank you, dear. Do any of you sitting here have questions?
And let me bring the
Robin.
mic to you so everybody in the room can hear and those online.
Yes. Robin, she's going to bring the mic to you in just a minute. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. This has been fabulous. I'm going to direct my question to Robert because he seems to, and also to Alice because you seem to both be so well informed. We've memorialized Thomas Coleman and William Harvey. Are there other lynchings that you are aware of in Utah? And I guess my follow-up question would be, are there plans to memorialize those as well?
Do you want to take that, Robert?
So the answer
Very
is
briefly.
yes and yes. Particularly, and we find more stories that we think will lead us to the story of a lynching, but the one we hope to be able to cover this summer with a soil collection is Robert Marshall down in Price. Okay, so we're going to do that, and we're going to try to get these markers installed for Harvey and Coleman. But of course, we've had the community asking us about what do we wish to do about the lynchings of other people of other races, and we respectfully try to address that by saying we want to be a part of that community doing it for them and not us doing something for another community. And so even with the Chinese lynchings and others, we prefer to work with those communities to help them address those instead of us trying to do it because it is their community.
I agree with that. I think it's important for the individual communities to be able to commemorate, to recognize what happened to their people in a manner appropriate to that community. For example, our soil collection ceremonies included Bamba Marilé, who danced and sang Bamba, which is part of the African diaspora, that music is. And we had a Haitian poet, I'm sorry, yeah, she's Haitian, right? Mm-hmm. A Haitian poet who shared some poetry, and Haiti is part of the African diaspora as well. And that was how we chose to, by incorporating music and speakers and dancers and poetry from the African diaspora, because those men are part of the African diaspora. Susan, you have a question, dear?
I do. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much. I have two questions. One is for Jamie. How can I see Belonging in Utah? I have not seen it. Is there a link or a thing to get to it?
Absolutely. You can go to kutv.com, www.kutv.com, and in the search box, you can type in Belonging in Utah, and there will be a list of stories that will pop up. And I'm going to kind of give you the cheat code with this.
Okay.
You may not get all of the stories that were done because the way that the analytics and all of that stuff works, there will be other stories that have the word belong in there that'll kind of be along the list. But what you can do is if you find a story specifically that talks about Black history, if you click on it and you play on the video player, it will play through one story and then it will just retroactively just go back to a previous story. So you'll be able to see other stories as well. If you have any particular subject matter, in particular about the lynching, you can also type in that search box on KUTV's website. You can type in belonging in Utah or belonging and then put lynching sites. And there's some keywords to help you find it, but in particular with those, you'll be able to find, I think we have it titled, Local Historian Shares History of Lynching in Utah or something like that. But there will be something that will have those key phrases to help you find what you're looking for. So that hopefully will get you there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And my second question is, I grew up in Utah, believed, like you said, that nobody would ever lynch somebody here, that it never could have happened here, and that there were wonderful saints here. Is there a state anywhere in the United States where a lynching did not occur?
That's a good question.
That's a really good question.
Because it seems like Utah would be the place,
I don't
but of course,
know.
when you
I
get to know the
think-
history, no.
I think
Yeah.
the better question would, well, the odds are more likely that we know what's been documented. So we go off of the documentation.
Right.
If you are asking the question of, was there ever any ill treatment that happened to Black people in the is there a place where it has not happened?
The answer is no.
The answer is no. What kind of bad treatment or maltreatment are we talking about? That's another, that's another question that it would be difficult to answer that.
Right.
We are going based off of the documentation and the stories that have been told when it comes to where they took place.
Right.
Alice and Robert may not know of all the sites, but we know that they did happen. We, in general, are not surprised that they happened here. It is one of those inherent, unfortunately, it's one of those things that's very inherent, especially for the Black community, because we have heard about it, we know about it, we're not surprised. It's just it is a normal way of life for us, unfortunately. But just to say, if there was a state that did not have lynchings at all.
And to address that a little bit further, I'm going to put it in the same terms that they said, documented. Because here on the NAACP's national website, they said lynching did not occur in every state. There are no recorded lynchings. So again, they're only doing what they know that is documented,
Recorded,
meaning
right.
it did not happen. So undocumented states would be Arizona, Idaho, Maine, Nevada, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wisconsin. Again, not saying that it didn't happen, it just hasn't been documented.
But that also reinforces what you were talking about with the museum, which, I'm definitely going to be we'll be in touch about that. But if you're thinking of only associating lynchings with just black people,
Exactly.
I hope that this panel has opened your eyes to see that lynchings happen to other people of color as well.
Right.
And if we were just to go off of Native Americans alone, I don't think
Yes.
anybody would ask the question whether or not there were lynchings that never took place in the state, because a lot of Native Americans have experienced, they have experienced lynchings in some form or another. So, you know, that's why I'm
And
on the
it's
form of
also,
saying,
like,
yeah.
what is officially a lynching?
Right, I was just about to
It's
say
an
that.
extrajudicial
Right.
killing
Right.
based on,
Right. And keeping in mind with Mr.
Race?
Coleman, we actually had to submit his name as a lynching victim because EJI did not accept it when we first gave it to them. And so
Right.
they made us go back and do the research and document it. And once we documented what happened to him, they accepted it. So it's,
So, and to get into some tighter definition of a lynching, excuse me, a lynching is when a person is murdered with intent to murder, and it is minimum of 2 people that are involved and more people than that who are involved. So when we talk about a lynching, we often think about that, you know, we're looking at a pole or a tree and a noose, a rope thrown over a limb with a noose, and then the person is hoisted up and then hung until they're dead. But that is not the only way that people have been lynched. If you go to a broader definition of a lynching, the slaughtering that took place of indigenous people when an army troop went in to a tribe and they literally slaughtered the entire tribe, that could, in a sense, be under the definition of a lynching, because they went in with the intent to murder, they murdered multiple people, and there was a group of them who performed the murders. So lynching has a very tight definition and a very broad one as well. When Sima and Dethi did the soil collection last year, under the direction and in collaboration with the Equal Justice Initiative, we had to go with the definition and the terms that they used in order to do that. So as far as, are there other lynchings that have taken place? These are the ones, these 3 are the ones that we know about in the state of Utah of Black American men, because we've been able to document them, our group has. Are there others? It's possible that there are others, but one of the things that we have to remember that happens is that when something does happen, very often the community will quickly go about covering it up. There was one community, and I won't say where for not to embarrass them, but they gathered together and they murdered a Black American man. And this was in the late 1800s. And then when it was realized that people were reporting about it, writing home about it and everything, the local sheriff quickly got a hold onto it, and he had the postmaster open the letters and verify that it did not mention anything about the lynching. If the letter did not, the letter was sent on out. If the letter did, the letter was destroyed. And so the local authorities quickly tried to cover it up, that it ever happened. But it is documented that it did happen. We have 2 more questions. Allison, are we good on time for live streaming, or?
I think we're okay maybe for 5 more minutes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Adrian, go ahead
Please,
and
yeah.
ask your question, and then we'll go to Al, okay?
Okay, so yes, my name is Adrienne Scott Ellis. I'm a retired educator from Davis County School District, and I'm a founder of Sowing Seeds of Change, and we use a community garden as a vehicle to have these difficult conversations. So in my experience in having these difficult conversations, there is a quick trigger to anger or extreme pain. So how do you convince individuals to go through the pain in order to get to the healing process. Because I feel a lot of people, as soon as they have those intense emotions, they want to bury them and shut it down.
That's interesting that you asked that, because I was thinking about us talking about that this morning as I was preparing to come today. And if any of the three of you have an answer, also chime into that. And this is, so several years before I married Robert, will be 11 years next month, I was working on my kitchen in my house, renovating it. And I was installing the kitchen cabinets, and I fell. And I very severely injured my leg. And my friend who was in the kitchen with me, she laughed, and then she said, okay, we got to get you to the hospital. And I said, oh, it's probably just like a little twist. It's no big deal. You know, I'm not worried about it. You know, I'll just stop working and, you know, I'll just go lay down and prop it up and it'll be fine. She said, no, we got to get you to the doctor. And I was in a lot of pain. And so within 7 minutes, she said, okay, let's take you to the nurse in our neighborhood. She took me to the nurse, and the nurse looked at it, and she tried to remove my shoe, and I said, yeah, don't do that. That hurts a lot. Don't do that. And she said, go to the hospital. And so we went to the hospital. By the time we got to the hospital, so when it happened, my ankle is normally like this, right? When we got to the nurse, my ankle was a little bit swollen, and the shoe was actually containing it, right? So you understand, I'm not just telling you the story of my ankle, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. The shoe was containing it so the swelling would not increase, right? And it was also holding back the pain, so that I would not feel so much pain. But when she unlaced, all she did was undo the bow and start to open my sneaker, I felt the pain, and it was intense. By the time we got to the hospital, my foot, my ankle, and my lower calf were about this big. And that was within 30 minutes time. And the nurse there removed my sneaker. I was in excruciating pain. And I kept telling her, do you have to touch it? Don't touch it. She says, I have to examine this. I need to know how bad this is so I know how to treat you. And she did so. She proceeded to do so. But all the while, I am in pain. I'm in excruciating pain as she's doing this. The x-rays, all the tests, everything, excruciating pain. So without going through that pain, I would not have received the treatment that I needed for my ankle, for my foot, for my leg. I would not have received what I needed so that I could then be better. After going through all of that, one of the things that I noticed is that I had to relearn how to walk. And it was very interesting because somebody said to me, as you're relearning, make sure you're relearning correctly how to walk. You need to place your foot down. You need to go heel, toe as you take a step. It's heel, toe, and your foot touches flat. Make sure you learn to walk correctly after that. I think in that same manner, Adrian, we have to allow ourselves to go through the pain, because those of us, I think a lot of people are feeling it, but we're keeping it tied in to something so tight like a corset or a sneaker, and it's so tight, and we keep it on so we don't feel that pain. But once we release it by having a crucial community conversation such as this, by listening, by participating, then the pain comes out. And it's difficult for us to deal with. We need to allow ourselves to feel that pain, let it go through us, because nothing gets out of us unless it goes through us, and then we're able to get it all the way out and go on, right? And then we relearn how to walk. We relearn how to walk without having that tight corset or that tight sneaker holding in everything. We relearn how to walk, being a little freer of that pain and acknowledging that pain to be able to go forward and to do our daily activities rather than fighting it into the back, making it stay in the back, punching it away, or tightening that sneaker or that corset so that we don't feel it.
Well, to continue with that metaphor, I think we spend a lot of time trying to keep that under wraps, trying to keep it tight, trying to keep it out. The theme for Sima Hadithi is unity through historic truth. Right now in our community, we're having conversation about falsehoods.
Right.
Whether you want to call it critical race theory, or whether you want to call it diversity and equity as reverse racism, we are trying to suppress something and using a false narrative. And somehow at the end of the lie, expect to reach what is true and what is real. We're creating all these falsehoods, and I somehow expect at the end of our walk along the road of lies that we're going to come to the truth. Right? So the first thing, as far as the reason I wanted to be executive director of Sima Hadithi, is if we're going to have disagreements, let's have unity, try to create unity through dealing with the truth so that we never have to go back and correct a falsehood. We can never become a community until we start talking about what is true and factual. And just like Alice said, it's going to be painful. And Jim and Kirk and I and others on our boards have had this conversation. How do we want to approach these difficult things? Because we are not out to hurt people, but we still recognize that we have to have these conversations.
Right.
We have to have these conversations because if the lie persists, the pain never goes away. Yeah. It never goes away.
JR and Jamie, do you have any suggestions on how to handle the pain?
I think in that metaphor, you are the nurses, right? Like you are the person that can assess what the situation is. And I think going to events like this, going to other events that Sima Hadithi has held, watching stories like the one you're making, it gives you a frame of reference for how to get through that pain.
Right.
It gives you, and then you can talk to people that are much, smarter than I am that can help you. Because I'm sitting up here talking about this, like I'm getting very emotional. Like I have not figured out how to be,
Non-emotional.
I have not figured out how to not let that well up I haven't figured out how to talk intelligently and not stutter, and I get really worked up.
So that's a really good point to carry. Al, we are going to get to your question. Angela, if we have to go off the live stream, go ahead and do that. I so apologize to you there who are on the live stream that we're not in person with you if you are having difficulty with what we're talking about, to help you ease it out. Here in person, we'll be able to do that a little bit better. But I think that's a really good point, and we need to cover that. One of the falsehoods that we have is that we think that after we've gone through something, the pain is done. So going back to my leg injury, I had to walk on crutches for a long time before I was able to walk without crutches. And I think that for the violence that has happened upon the Black American community in the U.S., and that still happens, I think every time something happens, I'm put back on the crutches. And I think we expect ourselves to, okay, I've experienced it. Okay, I've gone through the pain. I think I'm in healing. Why am I still emotional about it? You're emotional about it because, okay, are you ready for my response? Because it's going to be very simple, and you're going to say, that's too simple. Because we should be. Because we are humans, we are people, and we're talking about things that have happened to other people. Be grateful that you still feel something about what happened to those people. Be grateful because connection to one another is imperative. It is imperative in our world. I want you to, when you leave here, if not today, sometime this week, this is your homework assignment, I want you to go look up a story of a serial killer, a mass murderer, anyone. There are so many to find. There have been, what did we read, 600 and something that have happened in the U.S. already this year, and we're only to March, what is today, the 14th?
Yeah.
We're already to March 14th, only to March 14th. And I want you to read about him. And I do say him because there's also another study that shows that young white American men are literally on a pathway because of something else they're doing to becoming mass murderers, to becoming serial killers. And that's why so many of them are springing up. But I want you to read about him, and what you're going to find, one thing that reoccurs is this. They have disconnected from the people that they walk into a building or they go into a crowd and they kill. They have disconnected from them. And we disconnect in several ways. We disconnect by dehumanizing those people, saying in ourselves, making up this story in our own mind, that they are not human, they are not people, they are not like me. That then somehow gives us the right to disconnect, right? They're not people, they're not real. I can do whatever. They're like this table. I can throw this table over and it won't feel it, it won't matter, right? Disconnection. Be thankful if you sit here listening to these stories or any stories of the crucial community conversations, those hard stories to talk about, and you feel hurt, you feel pain, you feel sadness. That's different from the pain that you are holding back and you're holding in with that sneaker that you're tightening and tightening and tightening so you don't feel it. That's a different pain. One is refusal to let it happen and to admit that this is going on. The other, this, what JR is experiencing, why I turned our attention to the photos, because after what JR shared, I needed a minute, and I thought everybody else did, and I focused on the photos. That is connective pain. That is connective emotion, and we need that. In order to become a united society, not meaning we all have to be the same, but united, meaning that we care for one another. We got each other's backs, right? One another matters. We have to feel for one another. I feel for Adrienne when she hurt her leg and she had to have that surgery. What she's had to go through is the process to get healed. All I can do is hug her today. We feel for one another. We should feel for one another. That's how we connect. That's part of how we connect. Did Jamie, you have any ideas of?
Well, since we're on the topic of broken parts of anatomy and that kind of thing, the only thing I can think of, and it makes me think back on high school, You know how it is when somebody breaks their arm or their leg, they have a cast on. Well, one of the things that the doctors will at least try to do is try to make the healing process look good to the person who's hurting.
Look fun.
You know, if you're going to be hurting and if you're going to have to be around people who may not go through what you're going through, at least let's put a bright neon pink cast on you so at least they understand and they can at least be sensitive
Put
to
stickers
that.
on it.
Yeah,
sign
and then
it.
put their name on it, you know, hey, wish you the best with the well wishes in your healing process. And that's kind of the same thing, you know, I think that's what the Belonging in Utah series is aiming to do, is the doctor's cast through telling the story.
Right.
And it might be bright pink, it might be green, it might be blue, it might be purple. But the point is that there is a cast that we're talking about. And depending on what shade of color it is or the topic of the day, it's still a cast. And so it's just how is it going to be dressed up? Because it doesn't change the pain, but at least you're able to look at it with a different perspective and you're more sensitive. Just like if I see someone who's in a cast, I'm like, oh man, what happened? It's okay, it's going to get better.
Right.
And that's how I hope that my approach and the way that the Belonging in Utah series on KUTV2 News is viewed as, and it airs every Friday at 5 p.m. Most Fridays. March Madness is kind of changing things, but the goal is for it to aim every Friday during the 5 o'clock newscast. But the goal is that when you see these stories, that you'll go, oh man, okay, well, we're going to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really the only thing I can say about it, you know.
No, that's good. Thank you. Al, we are going to go to your question now. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate it.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Al Khalifa Kalishnikov, that's my name, and I represent my nonprofit, which is the Salt Lake City Area Anti-Discrimination Task Force. I'm glad, Alex, that you did make the distinction earlier between the very narrow and the broad distinction of what lynching is. And I wanted to also comment that there is the derivative of lynchings coming from hangings. Hangings in its very definition goes back to its very root, which is a very capital punishment, which is barbaric at its core. And that goes back to medieval times and probably even before that. I remember seeing something probably on PBS or some other type of documentary that the last legal hanging was done in the 20th century, and it was probably 100 years from now, probably 100 years ago in the 1920s. And so with that said, I wanted to go back to your figure, which was 45,000, I believe you said, people were lynched, and of that 45,000, 35,000 were Black Americans. Is that what you said?
4,500?
2,500.
4,500.
4,500.
And 3,500 were Black American people.
And that was mob lynchings, or
Yes,
was it?
women, men, and children.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes,
I just wanted to
3,500.
clarify. What was your source on that, if you don't mind me asking?
That actually wasn't my source. You know what, Al, I can't remember right now. I actually I used that as a footnote in a book that I did, and I'd have to go back to that footnote to see that source. But I can get that for you and send it to you.
Okay, I would like that.
And understand, one of the reasons that Equal Justice Initiative first did not accept the submission of Thomas Coleman as a lynching is because one of the things it said, it had to be something that was meant to intimidate the community that it was targeting. And because they left that letter to all N-word, need to stay away from white women, that is the thing that for EJI that submitted that it was a racial lynching because they left a message for the community not to do this. And so that is one of the standards that EJI has. And everybody, whether you're doing university research or an organization like the NAACP or Equal Justice Initiative under Brian Stevenson, are going to have some pretty definitive definitions, so that number is going to vary depending on who you're talking to, too.
Right, because of the definition of lynching. So this concludes this crucial community conversation on lynching and the soil collection ceremony that took place here in Utah last year as part of the Juneteenth events. Thank you, everyone, for attending here, those of you who attended in person and those of you who attended through the live stream. Thank you so much for attending. I encourage everyone to visit Simadithi Foundation's Lynching and Soil Collection Ceremony exhibit, which is currently installed here inside the Marriott Library on the second level in the glass cases along the wall. This piece that sits on our table is a new piece of art that Simadithi Foundation just acquired this week, and that will become part of that lynching and soil collection ceremony exhibit. And we will be adding that to that exhibit today. And the exhibit here at Marriott will close out the end of April. I don't remember the exact date.
The 21st, April 21st.
The 21st of April. So you still have more than a month to be able to go and see that. Thank you so much for attending, Allison. Thank you.
Thank you. And our wonderful panel. Thank you all for attending. We have tea and cookies and coffee. If you want to kind of continue the conversation, we have the room booked. So please feel free to mingle and check out books as well. We have permits available for Utah residents. If you're not part of the UVU, it's okay. I can help you set up a permit if you're interested in checking out a book. Thank you for attending.
And if you need a permit, Allison is really good at helping you go on and get that permit because she helped me.